Good evening, everyone. I am Genevieve Pamel, Director of Public Affairs for Rama Worldwide.
And my name is Ahmad Al-Halabi. I'm the Executive Director of Rama Worldwide in Michigan.
We are very excited to be partnering with Oakland Literacy Council and Michigan Immigrant Rights Center this evening to present Immigration in Michigan, Myths and Facts. Rama Worldwide is a crisis-driven nonprofit organization with focus on the Middle East, Northern Africa, and war-torn countries. Rama acts to protect all faiths and cultures in the region. Additionally, Rama is developing several domestic initiatives here in Michigan focusing on immigrant services, mental health, and ending the cycle of poverty.
Rama, which means mercy. Rama Worldwide is extremely grateful for the aid and collaboration it has not only received from Michigan, but from all around the country. We are looking to give back and spread our wings to address crisis at home. Our dream is to build a strong collaboration and coalition that understands the value of combining efforts and achieve true life-changing support for all in need. We look forward in working with as many organizations as possible and faith to ultimately set the examples for other cities, counties, and states.
We rise by lifting each other up.
Thank you, Genevieve and Ahmad, and thank you, Rama Worldwide, for supporting tonight's presentation. My name is Alicia Stevens, and I'm currently a board member of the Oakland Literacy Council. I also serve as chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. As you may know, Oakland County and the Oakland Literacy Council is a nonprofit organization that provides free tutoring to adults in our community. We support those who read at less than a level that can go through high school. And because of that, we are reaching out to those that are really at most risk in our community, and we are so proud to do this work. Every year, we provide more than 12,000 hours of instruction to almost 200 learners. The majority of the adults we serve are English language learners, and this reflects the fact that Oakland County has the highest number of foreign-born residents in the state of Michigan. Our adult learners navigate a complex legal immigration system, and we believe that the larger community would benefit from understanding that process. In this politically charged climate, immigration is a hot button issue, and unfortunately, misinformation abounds. At the Oakland Literacy Council, we feel that it's important to sort through that misinformation, and tonight we are going to do just that. I encourage you to ask questions, so please submit your questions using the Q&A feature found at the bottom of your screen. Questions will be answered following the presentation. And now it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Marie Nelson. Marie is a staff attorney with the Michigan Immigrant Rights Center in Ypsilanti. She is a graduate of Harvard Law School and has spent years specializing in immigration law, both in private practice and with nonprofit organizations. Prior to her current organization, she was the senior attorney at Freedom House in Detroit, where she represented U.S. asylum seekers. So welcome, and without further ado, we're going to turn it over to Marie Nelson.
Thank you, Alicia, and thank you to the Oakland Literacy Council for hosting this. And thank you everyone for being here and being interested in this topic. So give me a moment while I share my screen. Okay. Just give me 1 second. Okay, so as Alicia already explained today, our agenda and our objective is to learn about some common immigration myths and do our best to dismantle them. So as I'm sure all of you are familiar with, immigration is a very hot button issue, but there's no reason why it has to be such a politicized issue. I personally believe that immigration is something that we can all approach in a common sense way based on facts and based on humanity and based on what we think works best for our entire communities, including those who were born here and those who are not. And again, my name is Marie Nelson. I'm a staff attorney at the Michigan Immigrant Rights Center, and we are a legal resource serving immigrant communities across the state of Michigan. We provide direct legal representation to immigrants from many different parts of the state, and we also engage in advocacy for immigration policy issues. And we also do things like this, where we provide education and work with community partners to help advance information and resources to our community here in the state of Michigan. So to start out, we just wanted to give a brief snapshot of what immigration looks like in our state. So many of us might be surprised to know that 7% of our population is comprised of immigrants. And I believe as of 2016, that we were in one of the top 15 states in terms of immigrant population. And that's partially why it's so important to learn about these issues, because it actually does affect our lives. We live in a community where there are immigrants living with us and working with us. And in terms of where our immigrant neighbors are coming from, the biggest population is from Mexico here in Michigan, also India, Iraq, China, Canada, and then the rest of the 56% is immigrants from all other parts of the world. And 14% of all children in Michigan have at least one immigrant parent. And another more narrow view of immigration is looking at our county. So here in Oakland County, 13% of our population is foreign born. And that is actually almost twice the entire state. So these issues are really pertinent for us, those of us who live and work in Oakland County. And what we've also seen is quite a big increase in the last 10 years in terms of the immigrant population here in Oakland County. There was a 20.4% increase in the immigrant population from 2010 until 2019. So, I mean, again, just to reiterate that this is why we really appreciate folks coming to learn about these issues, because this is the best way to really inform ourselves and to be able to engage in these issues that affect us because we live all together, is to do things like this. So in order to really understand some of the myths about immigration, it's really important to get a grasp on the basic framework of our immigration system. And I will say that immigration is an incredibly complicated area of law, and probably, as someone who is somewhat of a subject matter expert in immigration law, I will say that it is really common that I see inaccurate things being said, sometimes in the news, but primarily in conversations I see amongst just the general population. There's a lot of misinformation, and I think it makes it really difficult for us to have meaningful conversations about immigration policy. And in order to explain the system, I'm going to be extremely brief and generalizing a lot, because a lot of people compare the immigration system and the immigration code to the tax code because it is very complicated. But I just want to start off with some basic definitions, because I do see a lot of these terms get used interchangeably. So a US citizen seems pretty common sense to us, but a US citizen is someone who was either born a United States citizen or someone who was born in another country and became a US citizen through applying for naturalization. That is obviously different from someone who was a green card holder. And the terms green card holder and lawful permanent resident mean the same thing. Green card holder is just kind of more the common term used by people, because the lawful permanent resident card used to be green. So that's the term I will be using. But generally, when I talk about a green card holder, that's someone who has permission to live in the United States on a permanent basis, but they do not have full rights as a United States citizen. And one really easy example of how their rights are different is that lawful permanent residents cannot vote in federal, state, or local elections. And they also can be deported. So obviously US citizens cannot be deported, but a green card holder, until they become a US citizen, their presence here is always contingent. There's certain things such as certain crimes, even crimes that probably a lot of us would consider really minor, like marijuana possession, because it's still federally illegal, could get someone with a green card placed in deportation proceedings. Or if they spend too much time outside the United States, they could jeopardize their green card status. So green card holders, while they are given permanent permission to stay in the United States, they do have to conform their behavior to a lot more rules than a US citizen does have to. And then I'm going to just briefly go over immigrant versus non-immigrant. An immigrant is someone who intends to reside permanently in the United States, and that's who I'm talking about today when we discuss all of the issues in the rest of the slides. I'm talking about people who want to live here pretty much forever. That's different from a non-immigrant. That's someone who comes to the United States for a temporary purpose and then returns home to their home country when they complete their purpose. So that's people like student visas, people on temporary employment visas, or someone who's even here as a visitor on a visitor's visa. And then an undocumented person is someone who does not have paperwork proving lawfully recognized status in the United States. I realize I say that in a really convoluted way, but part of the reason I put it that way is because not everyone who doesn't have paperwork is here technically unlawfully. In some circumstances, you might actually be a US citizen and never know it, just because, again, our laws are so complicated. So there's 5 major buckets in how people are able to get a permanent immigration status here in the United States. And probably the most common one that we're all familiar with is family-based immigration. So that's if someone gets a green card through a family member who sponsors them. But it's not anywhere near as simple as it might sound. Getting a green card through a family member is much more complicated than just having a family member here in the United States. Only US citizens and green card holders can petition for family members, and only US citizens can petition for their parents or their siblings. And on top of having a qualifying family member to sponsor you, you need to meet a whole host of other eligibility requirements. You have to prove that you're not going to enter the United States and become dependent on the government for sustenance. You have to prove that you don't have any disqualifying criminal record. You have to prove that you're healthy. I mean, there's a whole lot of things you have to prove in order to be eligible to immigrate to the United States. And there's also an insane amount of wait times. So depending on how close you are to the family member, you might be in a category where there's a really, really long wait to come to the United States. So for example, siblings of United States citizens, right now they have to wait about 20 years to get a visa in order to come to the United States, because different categories have different wait times. So it is a very, very long, frustrating process for a lot of folks. The next big bucket is employment-based immigration. And this is basically if an individual finds an employer who is willing to sponsor them for a green card. Technically, any type of employment could get an employment sponsor, but generally this is reserved for high-skilled workers. And that's because in order to petition for a non-citizen to get a green card, the employer has to prove that there is not a US citizen who can do the same job. And they actually have to go through a very long and complicated process of testing the labor market to prove that only this non-citizen, this foreign worker, can do the job. And under the law, the employer has to bear all of those costs of the labor market test. So it's not easy to convince an employer to go through all of that to get you a green card. And so because of that, it's generally higher skilled workers who are able to show the value to their company and that they deserve to have the employer take on these additional costs. And then there's a whole other big bucket that I'll call the humanitarian immigration system. That's refugees, asylees. UNT visas are visas for victims of severe human trafficking or serious crimes. VAWA is the Violence Against Women Act. So there are certain green cards available to undocumented people who are married to US citizens who become abusive and won't help them get their green card. There's avenues for those people to get a green card on their own. And then there's another category called the diversity lottery, which is exactly what it sounds. It's a lottery. Anyone in the world in certain countries with low rates of immigration to the United States is eligible to put their name in the lottery. And if they get picked, if they meet some other requirements, they might be able to come to the United States with a green card. And the last thing I will mention is what I call the void. There are just some individuals who have absolutely no immigration options in the United States. I think this isn't a myth that I was really going to focus on, but something I've heard a lot is that people think that, undocumented folks just don't want to do their paperwork, that they just don't want to bother to regularize their status here in the United States. And that unfortunately is so far from the truth. There are a lot of people who just don't have any immigration options at all. And it's because they don't fit into any of those categories I just described. And a really, I think, resonant example of this is DACA recipients. A lot of them, even though they may have been brought here as a baby, might have no immigration options if they don't have a qualifying family member, they don't have an employment-based sponsor. And because they were brought here as children, they might not have some immigration irregularities that they weren't responsible for, but that might make them ineligible for other types of immigration benefits. So that's a conversation I have to have all the time with people who contact me that, you have no options. I'm sorry. You're going to have to keep living in the shadows until something changes in the law, hopefully one day, which unfortunately has not happened in all the time that I've been working as an immigration lawyer. So now I'm going to go into the specific myths that we're trying to bust today. And the first one is that our immigration system is fair and race neutral. So I will be very, upfront about the fact that our immigration system has gone through a lot of change in the 1900s, and the system is much better today than it was 100 years ago. I mean, that shouldn't surprise anybody. But I am going to go primarily focusing on the history of our immigration system, because basically our system today was built on some groundwork that was incredibly overtly racist. And while that's different from what our system looks like today, we still feel the effects of those policies today. And also, I would argue that there are many, many ways that our immigration system is still not race neutral and not fair, in ways that are a little bit less obvious, but that's just a common thing we've seen across social issues here in the United States, where we found ways to make things, on their face neutral, but that's not the impact it has, and that's not necessarily the intended impact of these policies that appear to be neutral. But I will start by talking about the Chinese Exclusion Act, which obviously is a very overt example of racism in our immigration policy. This was the first law that completely categorically excluded one nationality from the United States. And I think the Chinese Exclusion Act, I feel like there's been more publicity about this recently. There's been a little bit more attention on the Asian American story in the United States. So some of you may have heard about this already, but back in the late 1800s, they were building the transcontinental railroad, and there was a lot of Chinese labor coming to the United States to work and build that railroad. And that led to a lot of tension and a lot of racism, a lot of mob violence towards the Chinese workers. And eventually there was a lot of lobbying to get Chinese people completely excluded from immigrating to the United States. And this was part of our law until 1943. And really the big motivation for us to get rid of the Chinese Exclusion Act was World War II, because China was our ally during that war. So this was, something that was in place as long as it was politically expedient until it wasn't. And again, it was a historic law at the time, but it lasted for a very long time in on our nation's books. And in 1917, they expanded the categories of nationals who were excluded from immigrating to the United States to include most other Asian countries, including Japan, Philippines, and they included countries in the Middle East as well. And they also imposed a literacy test and a head tax. So basically just a fee, a tax to come to the United States. And this was intended to actually reduce immigration from certain parts of Europe. primarily Eastern Europe, Italians, and Irish Catholics. So in the early 1900s, there was a lot of animus towards Irish Catholics and Italians, which surprised people today. But there was, a huge preference for immigrants coming from Western Europe who were whiter and more Protestant, and that was part of the motivation to impose literacy test and also to charge people to come to the United States. And then a really interesting court case, in case there's any doubt that there was motivations behind a lot of these policies to make sure that most of the people coming to the United States were white, was that, well, first of all, our naturalization laws were very explicit that only free white persons were allowed to become US citizens as of 1870. And then in 1870, they changed it to include Africans and people of African descent, to include former slaves and their descendants. But that still excluded individuals from every other nationality. And there was actually in the 1920s a man from India who sued, arguing that he was Caucasian because he came from a region in India that shared lineage with Aryans in Europe. And the Supreme Court actually said, we agree with you, you are technically Caucasian. He had presented all this anthropological evidence to prove he shared lineage with the Caucasians in Western Europe. But they still said, no, you made your case, you're technically correct, but you don't meet a common sense definition of whiteness. So we can see that basically the definition of who's white was mediated by the people who, identify themselves as white, who hold power and who want to control exactly where people are coming from. And another really interesting law was in 1907, the Expatriation Act. They stripped American women of their citizenship if they married non-citizens. But of course, men could marry any non-citizen and they would not be stripped of their citizenship. So this is just to, wrap up this whole section, is that, that the preservation of white supremacy and white dominance has always been a goal of the US immigration system. And we still feel the effects of these racist policies today. I mean, even in the sense that if these laws didn't exist, it would be really interesting to see what our country would look like now. And while we have changed to a lot of policies that appear race neutral, I observe in my work the ways that these do not have equitable impacts on the immigrants who are able to gain lawful status here in the United States. A second myth that I would like to address is the idea that most immigrants are here, quote unquote, illegally. And just as a first note, just to give some facts and data about Michigan, most of our foreign-born residents are naturalized US citizens. So again, that means they were born outside of the United States. They were not born as US citizens. They came to the United States and they eventually applied for and received citizenship. So over 50% of folks here who were not born in the US have already become US citizens. And then the rest of the immigrants in our state are a mix of green card holders, people with other temporary types of visas that I talked about, refugees and asylees, and folks who are undocumented. And while that's the statistics about, the statistics that, undermine the idea that most immigrants are undocumented. But I also just want to appeal to everyone on just more of a conceptual level that no person is illegal. And I think probably we've heard that slogan, but I want to just give some meaning to that slogan just by demonstrating that who is here legally versus illegally, which again is not a term I favor, but just for purposes of this demonstration, I will use it. Who is here legally versus illegally is a decision that's made by the government. There's no such thing as someone being inherently illegal. Who's here legally can change with each presidential administration, right? For example, there's something called temporary protected status, where if you come from a country where there's a lot of upheaval in the moment, the government, the president can give you temporary protected status. So whether you're here lawfully or unlawfully is really determined by who is in power at the time. And so it's very frustrating for me when I hear government officials using the term illegal immigrant and talking about how illegal immigrants are a danger to our society, when they're the ones who are making the policies and making the decisions to determine who is illegal and who's not. And I just want to give a really great example of this. In the 1980s, there were massive political upheavals in both Cuba and Haiti. And large numbers of Cubans and Haitians were fleeing their home countries and coming to the United States to seek safety. And our government decided to create quick pathways to lawful status for Cubans. They were paroled in large numbers and given pathways to green cards, whereas Haitians were detained en masse and deported. And even those who were able to somehow stay in the United States were not given a special path to lawful status. So our government decided that, here's a group that will treat differently and give them quicker access to benefits, which I'm not saying I don't agree with, but just to illustrate that the government's decision to treat two groups of immigrants differently is what led to one group being able to establish a life here with lawful status and to then pass that on to people versus Haitians who were not able to do so. And the reasons behind this are completely political, right? So, I mean, I would say probably on a less conscious level, most of the Cubans coming to the United States were white Cubans, whereas Haitians, for the most part, are Black. And it's hard to feel like that was not a calculus, that was not part of the calculus in deciding how to treat them. But the other reason was because Cubans were fleeing a communist government, whereas Haitians were fleeing a dictator who was committing all sorts of human rights abuses, but they weren't communist, and we were in the middle of the Cold War. So the US government didn't have political incentives to help the Haitians. And so this is just an example of how who's legal and who's illegal is completely a construct by the government. And that's why I don't find these terminology particularly helpful when we're having conversations about how to treat folks who are coming here seeking safety. And then the last myth I will address is that immigrants are a drain on our resources. I will just say as an initial thing that, I'm not an economist, and I would guess the vast majority of people who have an opinion on this topic are not economists. And this is a really, really, really complicated issue. So I think because it is such a complex issue, it's our economy, right? There's so many things that go into our economy. And because of that reason, I find that this is an area where it's very easy to isolate, pieces of data or isolate studies and decide that, this goes with my worldview. And so, I'm going to believe this about immigrants' impact on the economy because I found this one article that says what I agree with or my gut instincts. But I think that we as a whole can agree that stopping all immigration to the United States would not benefit our economy. I think to me that just seems common sense, but there are a lot of studies, again, by nonpartisan and actually a lot of libertarian groups that study this issue that find that on the whole, immigrants are a net positive on our economy. And when we look at the state of Michigan, immigrants make up 8% of our labor force, despite being 7% of our overall population. And they primarily work, they're most numerous in industries such as manufacturing, healthcare, accommodation, and food service industries. And I think throughout the pandemic, we all really saw that, our immigrant neighbors are doing the essential work. I think we all saw it ourselves during the pandemic, but I certainly saw how many of my clients were still working during the time that we were all shut down and really putting themselves in really vulnerable situations, not getting adequate access to, personal protective equipment and all that stuff, especially when the pandemic was new. So I think most of us can see in the community that, a lot of us probably work with immigrants, and I think from my perspective, it is very obvious that immigrants are an important part of our labor force. And then in terms of their spending power, which is something we determined by looking at household income and subtracting the amount they pay in taxes, immigrants in the state of Michigan have over $20 billion in spending power that they can put back into our economy. But also undocumented immigrants in Michigan paid over $450 million in federal, state, and local taxes in 2018. And that's really significant because undocumented folks don't get that money back the way the rest of us do. You know, they don't qualify for Medicaid. They don't qualify to get their Social Security when they retire. They don't get that money back, but they're still paying their taxes because they're supposed to. And then another really big myth I hear all the time is creating this association between immigrants and public benefits use. And so just to go back to what I was saying, there's so many studies on this topic. And again, if you actually research it, you will see that most, nonpartisan or even, some more conservative websites and liberal ones, they all pretty much find that there's a net benefit to the economy, especially when you look at immigration over time. So second generation immigrants, third generation immigrants. But that, again, because it is a complicated topic, I'm not really trying to convince folks otherwise on that. But the one thing I can tell you for a fact is that most immigrants are not eligible for public benefits in the United States. Undocumented immigrants, including DACA recipients, are ineligible for pretty much every federal public benefit except emergency Medicaid and some really, really specific healthcare related benefits. For example, pregnant women getting healthcare at the time they're having a baby. So there's, undocumented immigrants are not using food stamps, they're not getting cash assistance, they're not getting regular Medicaid, they're not getting Section 8 housing, they're just not eligible. And not most, but very, very many lawfully present immigrants are also not eligible for federal public benefits, which most state public benefits are federally funded. So in the state of Michigan, our state public benefits are federal benefits. And so even, if you're here on a student visa, you're here on a temporary work visa, anything temporary, you are most likely not eligible for any public benefits programs, except for the exceptions I just mentioned. And even those with green cards, there's waiting periods for a lot of these public benefits. Typically, for example, for food stamps, you have to have had a green card for 5 years before you're eligible for food stamps. So there is a lot of restrictions on access to public benefits. And there's 26 states in the United States that make immigrants eligible for some benefit programs that are completely state funded, because federally funded programs have those restrictions, but completely state funded ones do not. Michigan is not one of those states, unfortunately, though there are some local county programs for immigrants, but again, that depends on the county you live in. And then there have also been studies showing that lawfully present immigrants use federal public benefits at lower rates than US born citizens. So to compare, 32% of native born US citizens use food stamps compared to 25.4% of naturalized US citizens. And then just a quick plug for if you want opportunities to learn more or to engage in these issues, there are just a couple links here to some really great anti-racism trainings. If you want to get policy updates from my organization, feel free to sign up at our website. If you would like to get some information about how to volunteer, not for us, but just for any immigrant facing organization in the state, feel free to email us. And I'm just throwing on here to a few organizations that do grassroots immigration organizing work, including COSECHA, Michigan United, and Justice for Our Neighbors. And that is it for me.
So thank you, Marie. We really enjoyed that presentation. I know that I personally learned some new things during the information you shared, and I really hope that our audience picked up some important information as well. But the learning is not done. As we promised at the beginning of our presentation today, we are going to open it up for a Q&A, and I do think participants, many have come in, and I'm going to give Marie the first one. And so when you have a moment, the question is, can an immigrant legally work? And from the poster's understanding is that there's Afghan refugees that are coming into the US and they don't have a green card yet. And so the question is, are they going to be able to work and provide for themselves before they obtain that green card?
So that's a really complicated question, actually. It's a good question. It really depends on the individual. So I'll just speak to the Afghans. The Afghans, as an example, they're coming into the United States in a variety of immigration statuses. So if they've already been processed as a refugee by the time they get to the United States, then they will be able to work. Refugees are able to work. But if they're coming in some other way, and they are trying to just apply for a green card through a family member, they can apply for a work permit at the same time, but that can take usually, like right now, it's taking like over 8 months to get a work permit. So folks spend a lot of time waiting for their work permits while their green card applications are processing. So it really depends on the individual, unfortunately. And yes, there are a lot of delays.
Thank you for that information. And we have another question. Can an immigrant obtain a Social Security number?
So same answer. It depends on your status. So some individuals, if they're able to get a work permit, can get a Social Security number. So if you have a green card, you definitely have a Social Security number. But not everyone has a work permit, even if they're here lawfully. Like if, you might be here on a visitor's visa, for example, or even a student visa, and you might not necessarily have a work permit right away. So if you're in a status where that doesn't authorize you to work, you may not be eligible for a Social Security number.
Thank you. And a broader question, will any Afghans be coming to Michigan?
Yes. Gosh, the last time I heard, I believe there's 3,500 at least that the federal government told us is coming to Michigan. They're being placed in Michigan. And also we're getting quite a few unaccompanied minors from Afghanistan coming to Michigan. And Mark actually represents all the unaccompanied minors in Michigan.
Well, thank you for your service there. Another question. So during naturalization, the poster believes that they have 2 chances to pass. Is that true? And if so, when was that policy created?
You can apply for naturalization as many times as you want.
Thank you for busting that myth. So we are on a roll here. And so here's more of a historical question. So if a woman married a non-citizen in 1916, and let's say she lost citizenship, does she or would she regain that citizenship automatically when her immigrant husband maybe obtained citizenship a few months into their marriage? And so 1960, a woman marries, she loses her citizenship due to that union. Then her husband becomes a citizen. Is she somehow reinstated?
That is a really good question, and I have no idea. So I don't want to guess.
Good question from the audience, though. And so another question, what is the difference between illegal and undocumented?
So they're not really different. It's undocumented is just the preferred term, just because illegal kind of implies criminality. So just most of us in the field prefer undocumented because we believe that being here without documentation is not necessarily a criminal act.
And so another question, I thought the poster believed that undocumented workers were not legally allowed to work. And so they couldn't get a job where there was taxes taken out, something more formal. So the question is, how could they be paying $450 million in taxes in Michigan? They're just looking for understanding.
So there's a lot of reasons. So some people got numbers from, basically fake numbers, so they're able to pay their taxes. But basically 20 years ago, it was a lot easier to get a Social Security number without proving lawful status. And so people who have been here a long time have Social Security numbers that they actually got just by applying for one when the residency rules were not as strict. So those are the folks that I see paying a lot of taxes.
Thank you. And I know our presentation today was really focused on Oakland County. The poster asks, do you have any statistics around populations in neighboring counties in terms of immigration, like Macomb and Wayne? What are the general trends there?
Well, I can't tell you the general trends off the top of my head, but I would really recommend going to the website of the Michigan League for Public Policy. They have this amazing like interactive website all about immigration statistics in Michigan. So again, it's the Michigan League of Public Policy. If you just Google them, it's pretty easy to find their immigration page and they'll have that information.
Thank you. And the next question, I believe you already answered the first part of it. It's the question, in Michigan, are the Afghans coming? I think you said yes, they are, that there is a targeted number that's been approved for that immigration of those refugees currently. But the question is following up, how can organizations be helpful to the people that are coming to Michigan?
Well, in terms of organizations, I mean, I think like I described, the Afghans are coming in a whole host of different statuses. And so some of them will get federally funded support from our Office of Refugee Resettlement, but folks who did not come here as refugees are going to need just like basic life necessities, places to live, food, clothing. I mean, just things like that they're not going to be able to get federal assistance. So I would think it's resources that they really need of that sort.
Thank you. And this next question is really around population trends in general for the state of Michigan. So the poster writes that the high school graduation rate is decreasing. That affects enrollments at university, and they believe that that decrease overall has something to do with the decreased birth rate. So how and what can Michigan do to attract more legal immigrants to Michigan and to change the dependence of Michigan on the auto industry? So I know that's a little bit outside of scope, but I will say it is a very interesting question. So we definitely thank the poster.
Yeah, I mean, I actually do have a few thoughts. Like, we can change our policies to make it more, attractive for immigrants of all statuses. Like, just as an example, it's really hard to get a driver's license in Michigan if you're not a US citizen or a green card holder. They put you through a lot of hoops, or just providing like a healthcare plan for individuals who don't have a green card. Like a lot of students, for example, they're not eligible for Medicaid, and if they have, they have to pay for private insurance basically. So if we have things like that that are just more welcoming to immigrants, even if they're just here studying or on a temporary visa, that kind of thing, I think that would be helpful.
Thank you. And another question. So this poster has explained that they've heard that it's relatively easy to bring in elderly family members who are entitled to benefits. True amongst the, in particular in Dearborn. And so they're asking for you to address this. Is it true? Is it a myth? And then also, is it true that once that person comes in, that elder, that they can get their whole family here and also sign them up for federal and state benefits?
Well, it's a whole lot. So if you're a US citizen, you can bring your parent here. There is something called the affidavit of support. So the sponsoring US citizen has to prove that they're going to support the immigrant above the poverty line. And generally, in applying for public benefits that sponsor, their income can be used against the immigrant in terms of determining whether their income is low enough to qualify for public benefits. And then technically, yes, if someone comes to the United States, waits 5 years, applies for naturalization, is approved, they could bring their family members to the United States in the future. But again, that's limited to, certain categories, and a lot of them are really, really long waits. So it doesn't seem very practical for a very elderly person to be going through this process and bringing a lot of people over, especially because that elderly relative has to prove that they have the income to support all these other family members. So, I mean, that's true. I don't really know the relevance of it happening in Dearborn, but that's really how many of us also got here. So.
Thank you. And another question is, what's the latest on DACA? And what are some of the updates, coming from immigration orders, particularly past administration and into the current?
So, so DACA right now, unfortunately, it is in a weird state. New applicants cannot apply anymore. There was a lawsuit in Texas. A Texas judge stopped new applicants from being eligible for DACA. If you've already been given DACA, you can renew it. So that's the current state. And there's basically ongoing litigation in Texas to see what the outcome would be.
Thank you. And another question is, so they believe that cash businesses like liquor stores, that they can get their relatives immigrated somehow to the US and get them on Medicaid. So it's very, I think you partially addressed this with the preceding questions. Is there anything special about businesses that maybe better empower and enable them to bring in immigrants and family members?
I'm not really aware of what that's referring to, so I don't think I can speak to it.
All right.
But Medicaid has a 5-year waiting period. So even if you come here on a green card, you have to wait 5 years before applying.
So thank you. We've got our next question is, there is a participant that their organization assists in workforce training and employment for predominantly the immigrant population. So with work visas, authorizations, renewals. And can you speak to the current delays? Why is it happening and when will it change?
Yeah, so I mean, that's the bane of my existence too. Our immigration agencies are all incredibly backed up. They're incredibly slow. There have been, I would say, so I've been doing this under 3 different presidents now, and I will say that just every year has gotten slower and slower and slower. And then the pandemic hit, and they just have not recovered from that. So we were hoping to see things speeding along, soon, but really it's pretty common now for cases to take not a work permit, but I have clients who have had their cases pending for 10 years, and that's not unheard of at all.
Wow, that is a significant delay. What a wait for people that are in limbo, wondering if that application is going to. Another question, what is a conditional permanent?
A conditional permanent resident is, usually you will see this for folks who have been married for less than 10 years. So there was this Marriage Fraud Act in the early 1992 or something that basically said if you're married for less than 2 years and you apply for a green card through a US citizen spouse, you have to come back in 2 years and prove basically that you're still married.
Thank you. And another question from a poster, what is a visa bulletin? They know it has something to do with the US Department of State, something about green card applications, but what is it?
Yeah, so that's kind of what I was talking about with the waits for bringing a family member over. So the visa bulletin is basically every month the government says, if you applied for your, visa to the United States on this date, anyone who applied before that date is now eligible to actually get their visa. So like if you applied in 1990s to get a green card through your sibling, you might be finally eligible now to get to the United States, because the US government only gives out a certain number of visas every year. So every time you get your, you might be approved to come to the United States, but you have to wait in line because there's only like so many issued a year.
Thank you. And our next question, I think, is along that lines. Talk a little bit about the concept of cutting in line. There's some people that do it the quote unquote legal way. They wait their turn. And there's this thought that there's just so many immigrants jumping borders and cutting. And what do you think about all of that?
Yeah, so, I mean, there's no line. There's just so many groups of people for whom there is no line. And this goes back to what I was talking about in terms of, certain people with certain privileges are given a much easier pathway to lawful status in the United States. And we have laws that are designed to exclude certain people. And so I don't think anyone's cutting in line. There is no line. Our system is insane. And I don't think it's fair to compare someone who does not have the same opportunities with someone who is able to get in line, because they also might have very different circumstances. Somebody fleeing Afghanistan is very different from somebody, living happily in their home country, just waiting for the visa bulletin to show their number.
Thank you. And another poster says, can you explain what a biometric screening is? Something about fingerprints, and are they stealing identities? I've even heard rumors of that being used to pin crimes on immigrants to sort of underscore that, their criminal tendencies. What's this nonsense about?
So biometrics is like the poster said, it is basically taking the fingerprints of immigrants, and that happens pretty much every step of the process. In terms of applying for any type of immigration benefit, they're always going to take fingerprints. Where we really see it having data collection implications is probably when someone gets picked up for a criminal matter, like in the state of Michigan, if you're undocumented, you're not eligible for a driver's license. So a lot of my clients get picked up for driving without a license. They'll go to the police station maybe and get their fingerprints taken. That gets sent to ICE, and then they get put in deportation proceedings. So I mean, there is some surveillance going on in that sense.
Understood. And another question just came in on the practice, and I'll try to clarify, what is the difference between one person with a green card and another with immigration status? Could both work in the US?
Well, a green card is a type of immigration status. So that's just a general term. So I'm not sure if I'm misunderstanding the question.
Yeah, I don't know if the poster wants to re-clarify and resubmit the question. We'll definitely, bring that back to Marie. And I have a final question, unless that one comes back in. Someone is asking the difference between a fiance visa and a marriage visa. Which one is better, and is one faster than the other?
That's a complicated one. But the difference is that a fiance visa, you come here unmarried. You come here on the K-1 visa. Some of you may have heard of 90-day fiance. But you come in on a K visa, and then you get married within 90 days, and then you apply for a green card. If you come in on a marriage-based visa, that means you already were married. So maybe the US citizen or the green card holder went to your country and got married, and then you come back to the United States with a green card, or you come in on a different type of like a visitor's visa, and you get married, and then you apply for a green card.
So thank you so much. I think it's just about at time to wrap up our Q&A. I want to thank the audience for all of those questions, very reflective, really helping us get the truth out there and bust some of these things that are just simply not true and misunderstandings, and really clarify information that's out in the communities, so that we can all give a better understanding of what's happening currently in the immigration landscape for Oakland County, the state of Michigan, and how we can both position ourselves that we are informed, not spreading misinformation, but really addressing the group as with truth. And so what I'll do now is I do believe that we have a video that we'd like to share. But before we close tonight's program, I do have two brief announcements. The first thing is I would like to publicize a special community event. So as you may or may not know, Oakland County is celebrating Welcome Week, which is really focused on our immigration. And this Friday coming up from 6:30 to 8, and this is going to be out Worldwide US headquarters that's located right close to us in Beverly Hills. There's going to be a free event. There's going to be a free walk-in vaccine clinic, community resources, cultural performances, a food truck, and much more. So please don't miss out the fun. And if you need additional information, we're going to send a flyer to all of tonight's participants so that you can spread the word as well. And so, Marie, before we conclude, do you have any final comments that you would like to leave us? And like I said, you have really informed me. I have learned some new things during this presentation. And so any final thoughts about immigration and just everything you've picked up through your career and just helping serve the community?
I mean, I don't have anything to add, but besides saying thank you everyone for coming and for just learning, because I think that's a really big, important step in terms of figuring out what's best for our communities and how to approach these really complicated policy issues.
So thank you. And so lastly, for our audience, we want to share a short video featuring a few of our adult learners and a staff member who have navigated the immigration system to really make a new life in the US, not only for themselves, but for their families. Sat down with these 4 individuals and asked them, how did they immigrate to the US? Why did they come here? And most importantly, what are their dreams for the future? And so without further ado, we're going to turn it over to the video.
I came from 2017. I immigrated from South Korea, and then my family came here. So my family members, my wife, daughter, and the son, and then my 3 dogs. So my sister, she has her own restaurant in America, and then I worked almost 2 years. Finally, I opened my restaurant, Sushi Yobi. Yobi means sun shower. Yes, shiny and rainy. Maybe 2 years later. Yeah, I think 2 years later. Yeah, I wanna get the citizenship.
I moved to Michigan 20 years ago, in 2001. I came by myself. I stayed with my cousin Lane. I came to America to have a better life. From Peru, I like the most about United States that there is a combination of multiple cultures, and even though I am far from my country, I feel like at home because I still have my traditional presence and my family. I have a sponsor, my sons and my father. I have 3 sons. 2 sons, they are a teacher. One son, they are a doctor in anesthesia. They are I'm so happy. I say thank you, God.
I live in the United States for more than 2 years. My tutor helped me to study to be citizen. I miss my friends, my family in Mexico, but I found in the United States and Michigan a very beautiful places, amazing people, and I would like to be here for many years. Well, when I was in Mexico, I was a professor at the university and I love teaching, but now when I come to the United States, I start to work in a non-profit organization called Centro Multicultural La Familia, or Multicultural Family Center, and also I belong to a program called Ventanilla de Salud in the Consulate of Mexico. And this place, I found a very good place to help others to get a doctor, to found health resources. I help other people to know about health because I work as a health educator. So I feel blessed in this job. One of my goals when I started to live in the United States was learn English, speak in English. So now one of my goals is help others to feel more confidence when I speak English. Because now I am a volunteer in Oakland Literacy Council to help my community, Hispano-Latino community, to be a student So this is very important for me, help others. And I would like to be a medical interpreter. I feel very happy when I can help others.
When I left Syria, I left family and relative and memories behind. When I came here, I started learning English. I know some words, I know grammar, but speaking and listening, it was very hard for me. But by practicing, I think I'm getting better and better. In Jordan, we registered as a refugee with United Nations. They chose our case to relocate in USA. We were very happy to relocate in the United States because we are looking for a safe place to live and start a new page in our life. When I left Syria, I was working as an attorney. I'm not able to practice law here in the United States because I need more schooling. I miss being an attorney again, but I'm so happy helping others to improve their English skills. So in 2012, my family and me decided to leave. I came here on a visa, and after 1 year, I received my green card. I applied to be a citizen. I started my application and I did the first step. It was the fingerprint. I'm just waiting for the test and to complete the whole process.
So again, I would just like to wrap up today's program. Thank all of you for your interesting questions. Really, our presenter Marie, our sponsors for today's event that really came together in the spirit of understanding. And do know that the Oakland Literacy Council is 100% dedicated to helping raise the literacy of all people at Oakland County that don't read at that 9th grade level. And that a lot of our outreach really directly centers population. And you've heard the stories of 3 of our students and even someone that works for the Oakland Literacy Council, their journeys. And so hopefully you've learned a lot from today's presentation. We hope that you will continue to engage with the Oakland Literacy Council and keep top of mind for all things with immigration, and to make sure that we are personally doing our part to bust those myths, really decrease misinformation, and to really look at our immigrants as what they are. And I think the presenter got to that, just simply another human being, not illegal versus illegal, but really someone that may be new to our area through immigration. And through busting those myths, we can definitely embrace them with open arms. And we would hope that you would carry that out in your day-to-day life. And by all means, share the information you've learned today. And with that, we will conclude our program, and we hope to connect with you soon through the Oakland Literacy Council.